There was a time when power had a sound. Not the hum of electricity, but the thunder of steel pistons and the hiss of boiling water. And if you followed that sound across America's rails, sooner or later, you'd find the name Lima. The Lima Locomotive Works, born in a small Ohio town and destined to build some of the most powerful steam engines the world had ever seen. Engines that could tear through mountains, haul 100 freight cars without breaking stride, and make grown men stop just to listen. For a few shining decades, Lima wasn't just a company. It was the forge of American muscle, where heat, pressure, and genius turned metal into motion. But, like every great empire, its strength carried a hidden weakness. The same obsession with steam that made Lima legendary would also seal its fate. This is the rise and fall of Lima Locomotive Works, and how innovation made them unstoppable until it made them obsolete. Long before Lima became a name whispered with reverence by rail fans, it was just a modest workshop, a handful of men, a forge, and the hum of ambition in a quiet Ohio town. The year was 1869. America was still young. Railroads were spreading like veins across the land, and deep in Lima, a small machine shop was just trying to keep up with the needs of local logging and industrial outfits. They repaired, they rebuilt, they improvised. There were no grand blueprints yet, just grease, grit, and problem solving. But in that workshop, surrounded by the smell of hot iron and timber sap, a seed was planted. And that seed would grow into one of the greatest locomotive builders in the world. Then came a man named Ephraim Shea, a lumberman, an innovator, and someone who saw the forest not just as the trees to be cut, but as a challenge to be conquered. Logging railroads of the 1870s weren't smooth or straight. They twisted up mountainsides and crossed rough, uneven ground where traditional locomotives simply couldn't go. Shea had an idea, a new kind of locomotive, one that traded speed for traction, power, and endurance. He built a prototype with gears, shafts, and pistons arranged in a way no one had seen before. Instead of relying on smooth rails and perfect conditions, Shea's design gripped the tracks, clawing its way up steep grades and around impossible curves. It was a working man's engine, rugged, patient, and unstoppable. Lima took notice. The company saw something in Shea's invention that went beyond the logging camps. They reached an agreement to build his locomotive commercially, and with that single decision, Lima Locomotive Works was born. The first Shea locomotives rolled out of Lima's shops in the 1880s. They weren't glamorous and they didn't set speed records, but they did something far more important. They worked every single day in the toughest conditions imaginable. They hauled timber where horses failed, climbed mountains that defeated other engines, and ran on tracks that were barely tracks at all. Word spread fast through the logging industry. Orders began to pour in from Michigan, Oregon, and beyond. Every railroad that faced impossible terrain wanted a Shea, and every Shea bore the Lima nameplate. The Shea locomotive became the symbol of Lima's ingenuity, a perfect balance of practicality and engineering boldness. It wasn't pretty, but it didn't need to be. It represented something deeply American, doing whatever it takes to get the job done. And with that success, something else began to change inside Lima. The little shop that had once catered to lumbermen began to dream bigger. By the dawn of the 20th century, the company was standing on the edge of transformation. Steam power was advancing fast. Mainline railroads were demanding stronger and faster locomotives, and Lima had the confidence and the cash to take a leap. The Shea had built Lima's reputation brick by brick, gear by gear. Now, the company was ready to step out of the woods and onto the main line, to move from logging tracks to the grand stage of American railroading. By the time the 1910s rolled around, Lima was no longer a small-town builder tucked away in Ohio. The forests that once fueled its success were thinning, but the country's appetite for movement was growing faster than ever. Railroads were the nation's arteries, hauling coal, steel, grain, and dreams from coast to coast. and every company wanted locomotives that could run longer, faster, and pull harder than the last. Lima saw the opportunity. It had already proven itself in the logging world. Now it was time to take on the main line, the grand stage where the biggest names in American industry were fighting for supremacy. Alco and Baldwin were already giants, turning out engines by the thousands. But Lima had something they didn't: a hunger to innovate, and a willingness to rethink everything about how steam power worked. That's when William E. Woodard entered the picture. He was a visionary. To him, the steam locomotive wasn't a finished invention. It was a machine still waiting to be perfected. When Lima brought him aboard, the company's future shifted overnight. Woodard believed locomotives didn't have to choose between power and speed. At the time, most heavy freight engines were strong but slow, built to grind up hills but not to race across the plains. Passenger engines, on the other hand, were quick but couldn't haul the weight. Woodard saw no reason why one locomotive couldn't do both, and his solution would change steam design forever. He called it superpower. It wasn't just a marketing phrase, it was a new way of thinking about steam. By redesigning the firebox and boiler, Woodard allowed locomotives to burn fuel more efficiently and generate far more steam pressure. He rebalanced weight distribution, giving the driving wheels better traction without sacrificing speed. The result was an engine that could pull a heavier train at higher speeds using less fuel to do it. In the early 1920s, Lima put Woodard's theory to the test. The result was the 284 Berkshire, named for the Berkshire Hills where it was first tested. When engineers saw it in motion, they couldn't believe their eyes. It accelerated like a passenger locomotive, yet it hauled freight with the brute strength of a mountain engine. The sound of it was unlike anything else on the rails. Railroads lined up to order them. The Nickel Plate Road, the Chesapeake in Ohio, the Pere Marquette, each wanted a piece of Lima's superpower. For a company that once built geared logging locomotives, this was a stunning leap forward. In the span of a few short years, Lima had gone from regional manufacturer to technological leader. The Berkshire moved an entire industry forward. Other builders scrambled to catch up, but Lima was always one step ahead, refining, tweaking, perfecting. You could feel it in every rivet, every piston stroke. This was the moment when Lima stopped following and started leading. And as the 1920s roared on, so did the company's ambitions. By the 1930s, Lima Locomotive Works was no longer chasing anyone. It was leading. The company's superpower philosophy had rewritten the book on steam design, and the 284 Berkshire stood at the center of it all, the very image of modern American railroading. Across the country, the great railroads were lining up to buy them. The Nickel Plate Road, the Chesapeake in Ohio, the Erie, the Boston and Albany, each wanted that same combination of brute strength and smooth efficiency that only Lima seemed to be able to deliver. And for Lima, it was a golden time. The factory floor never slept. Sparks flew from welders, casting pits glowed, and the sound of hammering echoed day and night as orders poured in. The company that had once started as a repair shop in rural Ohio was now a cornerstone of American industry. Then came World War II, and everything shifted into overdrive. America needed power, locomotives to move troops, tanks, and supplies to ports and bases across the continent. The railroads became the nation's lifeline, and Lima answered the call. Day and night, the plant ran at full capacity. Every foundry furnace roared, every lathe spun. The company's workforce swelled into the thousands, and its locomotives became an essential weapon of logistics that pulled the endless strings of freight that kept the war machine alive. The war years brought Lima its greatest production peak. Between 1941 and 1945, nearly every major railroad in America was operating at its limits, and Lima locomotives were at the heart of that movement. For a brief, shining moment, the company stood shoulder to shoulder with Alco and Baldwin, forming what many called the Big Three of steam. But ask any engineer of the era which builder made the best locomotives, and more often than not, they'd name Lima. By the late 1940s, it seemed Lima had achieved the impossible. It had turned steam into something nearly perfect. The locomotives were faster, cleaner, and more efficient than ever before. Every new model felt like a victory over physics itself. But perfection, as history would soon prove, can be a dangerous thing. Because while Lima was perfecting steam, the world around it was already moving on towards something smaller, quieter, and far more disruptive. The golden era was dazzling, yes, but it was also the calm before the storm. When the war ended, America exhaled. Troops came home, industries retooled, and the railroads suddenly found themselves at a crossroads. For decades, steam had been the heartbeat of American power, but now, something new was stirring in the yards. It didn't breathe fire or leave a trail of smoke. It hummed. Quiet, clean, efficient. It was diesel electric. To railroad executives, the change was irresistible. Steam might have been majestic, but it was expensive. It guzzled coal and water, demanded armies of maintenance crews, and spent more time in the roundhouse than on the main line. Every run meant hours of cleaning, oiling, and inspection. A diesel, on the other hand, could start cold, run longer, and require a fraction of the upkeep. Then came General Motors' Electromotive Division, armed with the 567 series diesel engine, which was a compact powerhouse that delivered reliable performance without the headaches of steam. Their locomotives, sleek and modern, rolled out in streamlined colors and promised the future on rails. For railroads struggling with post-war costs, it was an easy choice. And just like that, the tide began to turn. One by one, railroads that once relied on Lima's steam giants began ordering diesels from EMD. The change happened faster than anyone expected. In the space of just a few years, the same yards that had once echoed with the pounding rhythm of pistons and rods now hummed with the low throb of diesel engines. For Lima, it was a nightmare in slow motion. Its super-powered locomotives were still masterpieces, but masterpieces that nobody wanted to buy. Lima's engineers saw what was coming. They knew that if they wanted to survive, they had to evolve. And they tried. Experimental diesel prototypes were drawn up, designs were tested, partnerships explored. But Lima was a steam builder at heart. Every bolt, every casting, every square foot of its factory was built for fire and pressure, not pistons and generators. The transition was too big, too fast. EMD had a decade-long head start. Alco was already moving into diesel production, and Baldwin was scrambling to reinvent itself too. By the time Lima introduced its first serious diesel efforts, the market had already been claimed. For the first time in its history, Lima wasn't leading the charge. It was chasing a train that had already left the station. And deep inside the company, the truth began to settle in. Steam, for all its power and beauty, was no longer the future. In 1951, Lima made a desperate move, a merger that many hoped would save it. The Baldwin Locomotive Works, itself struggling to keep up in the diesel race, joined forces with Lima to form a new name, Baldwin Lima Hamilton, or BLH. On paper, it sounded like a powerhouse with Baldwin's long legacy, Lima's engineering talent, and Hamilton's industrial equipment expertise, all under one roof. But in reality, it was a partnership born of survival, not strength. Inside the new company, the problems began almost immediately. Baldwin and Lima had different ways of building, different management styles, and different visions of what the future should look like. Baldwin's corporate structure was rigid. Lima's was more personal and workshop-driven, and the two didn't mix. The production lines were outdated, the factories tooled for steam, not diesel. By the time BLH tried to modernize, EMD and GE were years ahead. Even worse, they didn't have a winning diesel design to sell. Baldwin had experimented with its own engines, the ones that were heavy, over-engineered machines that struggled with reliability and efficiency. Lima's diesel projects had been more cautious, never fully developed before the merger. Together, they'd produced locomotives that were solid on paper, but already behind the times in practice. Railroads gave BLH a polite look. then quietly turned back to the proven reliability of EMD. Every new model BLH introduced seemed just a little too late, a little too expensive, or a little too complicated to maintain. The market had already moved on, and the railroads were not sentimental. By 1956, the inevitable happened. BLH shut down its locomotive production for good. The Lima Works, once one of the great temples of American industry, fell silent. The final locomotives rolled out, their fresh paint glinting in the Ohio sun, and then nothing. No more steam, no more roar, no more smoke rising over the city. The men who had built machines that once shook the earth now stood in silence as the great doors closed for the last time. It wasn't a collapse made of drama or scandal, it was quieter than that. The world had simply changed, and Lima hadn't changed fast enough. But even after the foundries went cold and the smokestacks stopped breathing, Lima's legacy refused to die. The locomotives they built, especially the 284 Berkshire, became legends in motion. These weren't just machines, they were engineering poetry in steel and steam. Balanced, efficient, and breathtakingly powerful, the Berkshires proved what was possible when design met daring. Rail fans still speak of them with reverence. Historians call Lima's superpower concept the peak of steam evolution, the moment when the technology reached perfection, just before it was replaced. There's a certain tragedy in that, isn't there? Because Lima didn't fall from weakness. It fell because it succeeded too well, building engines so good that the world no longer needed to improve them. And when progress took a different path, Lima was left behind, unmatched but out of time. So here's a question. Have you ever seen a Lima Berkshire in motion? Tell us where and what it felt like to stand next to that piece of history. And if you love stories like this, hit subscribe and stay tuned.